In this module, we're going to talk about wildland urban firefighting, the change in strategy and tactics that are required whenever we're in a large Santa Ana wind-driven sundowners type of fire where the fire is driving the incident. I got to be honest and say this was just about the coolest, funnest, that's not really a word, um, thing that I did as a firefighter. I loved being on big campaign fires. I've never been more exhausted, more dirty, uh, just filthy dirty than on these kind of fires. But the reward, the sense of going to the rescue to all of these homes and families. It just was really powerful, really the coolest thing that I ever did. That, along with some of the rescues where I knew I saved someone's life. Well, let's get going on this. What makes Wildland Urban Interface fires so unique? Well, first of all, there's all the hazards. Lots of unique hazards. It's a very dynamic incident. Listen, when you have a structure fire, you know what you got for the most part. Sometimes you get surprised by a building that isn't the way it appears. But with wildland firefighting, it's a constantly dynamic, changing environment and the fire behavior and the weather, all of these things going on. So we have lots of hazardous materials out there, propane tanks. We're going to have an enormous amount of traffic on the first day of a fire before the police get in and get control. And, along with that, just like we've seen in recent disasters, a panicked public in the Camp Fire up in the Paradise area. People could not get out, and as soon as one car got stuck, then they all got stuck, and that's where they found multiple people who were killed in their cars trying to evacuate. Some of the other things that we're going to see is, if you've got a home that's in the wildland urban interface, people like to have like a cabin look to them. And so we encounter a lot of wood siding, wood shake roofs. We're trying to eliminate all of those in the state of California, but there's some of them still out there. You might encounter homemade bridges, so you got to pay attention. Any bridge you go over, make sure it's made by the county or by the state, not by some person who just put together a bridge. Poor access, narrow roads, dirt roads, and as I said before, this panicked response of the public. We're also going to encounter water problems in the Thomas Fire in Ventura. One whole section of Ventura lost water because they lost power and the pumps weren't pumping and the tanks were empty. So houses burned where firefighters were there, but there was nothing they could do. Structures that are oftentimes don't have proper defensible space are in box canyons or in a chimney. So interface fire is oftentimes it's moving out of the wildland vegetation and into a developed area. And where it impacts those homes, that's what we call the WUI, or the Wildland Urban Interface. And it happens all over the world. We just saw it in Australia in a horrific way. But we have this constantly changing fuels too that adds to the issue. People want to have big, beautiful trees to shade their home, and they want to be in and amongst the pines or the conifers, whatever we want to call them, and they add ornamental vegetation, and sometimes they put that ornamental vegetation right against the house. This is not good. This is what creates problems in the wildland urban interface. So an interface fire presents all sorts of issues and conditions that require a change in strategy, a change in tactic. We're not just going to run a bunch of progressive hose lays up the flanks and knock this baby out. We're going to have to use unique strategies. The normal strategies aren't going to work. They're too rigid. So when this happens, usually we go defensive and we're going to go into structure protection. The primary responsibility is to protect structures and as many as we can. And of course, first, safety for people, and then safety for structures, and of course, safety for our crew. And we want to protect the environment as well as much as we can. So, we're going to work together with other fire departments. Usually on these kind of fires, fire departments are coming from all over the state, and you're going to be working with other agencies. You got to be well coordinated. First day is chaos. Usually by the second day, we have an action plan and it's communicated and things start getting better. So normally with these kind of fires, we're not even going to go offensive with structures. We're going to protect the homes that we can from the outside, whether by just standing by or treating it with foam or whatever we have, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to move on to the next one. If a structure is already on fire, we're probably going to pass by, or we might stay there to protect the structures that are next to it. But if a structure is a quarter involved, we're not going to do anything about it. I knew some guys from Glendale Fire, and they were pulling onto a cul-de-sac during the Glendale Hills Fire, and they looked down the cul-de-sac, and all of these panicked people were out calling for them to come down and save their homes. They looked down the cul-de-sac and saw that every house was already on fire, and they turned right out of the cul-de-sac, went up to the next street and saved homes that they could save. And that other cul-de-sac, everybody's house burned. That's called structure triage. We have to do that when we're doing wildland urban interface firefighting. We're going to work, like I said, with a whole bunch of different agencies, state and federal, the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, CAL FIRE. These are big departments that get involved in our big wildland urban interface fires. But of course, Ventura County, LA County, Riverside County, we fight a lot of these. A lot of people consider LA County Fire one of the world's experts in wildland firefighting because they have so many. I was in an area where we just had wildland fires all summer long, and it was just pretty common. It was our normal type of run. So let's define interface real quick. We're just going to run through these. There's some quiz questions on this, so you better pay attention. Interface we use in a general term. It's where the humans and their developments intermix with the wildland fuels. So there's 4 different wildland urban conditions. First of all, the interface condition. And this is where a tract of homes, like in the photograph above, abut up against wildland fuels. So as developers come in and they do one track and then another track, we go into those brush areas, and that we call classic interface. The intermix condition is similar, but actually more like communities like Malibu or Calabasas, where it's not a tract, but it's a bunch of individual homes with more acreage to each home, and they're scattered in the wildland area. So they're mixed in. So there's one here, one there, one here, one there. Like I said, Calabasas, Malibu are classic examples of an intermix condition. Little harder to protect because we get in a situation where we got to commit at least one engine per house. And these are mansions, ranches, large properties that are popped here and there. We have a lot of it in Ventura County, LA County, different areas that are like this, but classic Malibu. The occluded condition, the classic one for this in the LA area is the picture up above, Griffith Park, where you have a wildland that has been preserved, and all surrounding it is the urban area. So The city has another classic one in New York is Central Park. So you have this huge area that's a park or wildland that's surrounded by homes. That's the occluded condition. So the brush is an island, not the homes are an island or peninsula. So it's kind of opposite. Then lastly, we have a lot here in Ventura County, Kern County, San Bernardino County, Riverside, but not as much in LA County as we used to, because in LA County it just goes from house to house to house. Our farm areas are fewer, but the rural condition where we have farms or ranches, very large pieces of property with maybe one or two or a handful of structures on it, and then great space to the next one. We call that a rural condition. And there are parts of Ventura County where we see that. For those that are in my OXNARD class, you can, picture all around OXNARD and different parts, Santa Paula, Fillmore, where we have rural condition. So, those four conditions, those definitions are great. Really, here's what it comes down to. Are there structures that are up against the wildland? Are they threatened or are they not? If they are, we've got a whole new problem and we got to use a different strategy because we have these special conditions. And some of them require that we're going to remain, they all require that we're going to remain mobile. Some of them require that we're going to have to triage. We might bump and run. We might save one house and skip another. The fire it's just really crazy sometimes when, I don't know if some of you did this after the Thomas fire in Ventura or one of the fires in your neighborhood, if you're in a different area. You may have driven in and here's one house that's standing and 5 that are gone. And then vice versa, 5 that are standing and 1 that's gone. There's no rhyme or reason to it other than maybe if you consider terrain, the way the wind was blowing, and the defensible space that those people had around their homes. So we can't protect them all. We're going to do our best, and we're not going to be random like the fire. We're going to make decisions based on science and good firefighting tactics. We're going to talk about that. So in these kind of wildland urban interface fires, the fire drives the incident. We're following the fire or we're running ahead of it. We're doing everything we can to save as many structures as possible. But in doing so, we put ourselves at great risk. We're in front of the fire more often than not. So you constantly have to monitor the fire behavior, the weather, the conditions around you. You've got to pay attention. Every person on the team has to be a safety officer. Every person on the team has to keep their eyes open. When you're sitting backwards as a firefighter, you might notice something that the captain and the engineer didn't notice driving the other direction. So don't just count on their experience and the fact that they have a higher rank than you. Be a part of the safety team. There's no time, especially on the first day, to plan and organize. We're just going to work with some independence, but with the overall plan in mind. And we need to make sure we've got our comm plan, that we're working with the other crews, but we need to ensure our actions contribute to the overall fire effort. So water's going to be limited, and you got to use it wisely. Wasting water, spraying water at fire flames is a waste of water. Don't do that. You got to preserve your water. Remember, you've only got 500 gallons in your tank. Hopefully you get a chance to top off. Maybe you have a hose line you can throw in there. Don't waste water. And be aware of some of the other unique threats to your safety. Power lines are going to go down. You're going to have limited visibility. Fire engines have driven right off of a cliff. Firefighters have stepped off cliffs or stepped into septic tanks or into pools. Some of you laughed at the story I told about my friend falling in a pool, but you know what? He could have easily died. He got out because he didn't panic. But if you panic, if you fall in a pool, you're not going to get out. You got so much gear on, you're weighted down. So you need to be really paying attention to the evacuating public. Firefighters get run over by people panicking, and it happens every year. So normal structure firefighting strategies are not going to work. We're not going to, at least on the days where things are really going crazy, we're not going to do structure interior attack. We're only going to do what we can from the outside. So what are we going to do? First of all, we're going to size up what's going on. Our primary considerations when you arrive at a fire is, first of all, firefighter safety. Are public lives threatened? Potential fire behavior. Is the fire moving towards structures, that threat to structures? Can we get to those structures? What's the access and what kind of water supply? We're going to consider these things along with, well, what's the fire history of the area? Maybe this area hasn't burned in decades and decades and decades. That was the case in Paradise. So those homes were just covered with brush. It was thick, thick brush. So we want to consider the fire history. When did it last burn? And what are our weather conditions? Well, you should have checked that first thing in the morning before even going on duty or right when you came on duty. What's the forecast for that day? And as we move from area to area, we're going to look up, look down, look all around. We need to continually be checking our weather, checking our fuels that we're in. Is it heavy, medium, or light? Have we been in drought? Is it just after a rain? All of these things are things we need to consider, and especially, what's the topography around us? You certainly don't want to try and protect a house that's in a chimney, a canyon, or some kind of a box canyon. You know, where are we? What are the natural man-made barriers? Chief Harris, John Harris and Gary Harris, they like to say that tactics begin with terrain. Watch the terrain around you. Watch the fire behavior. What's the rate of spread? Is it spotting all around you? Is it spotting past you? Well, that's going to create a condition that could turn into area ignition. What kind of defensible space do we have? These are all things we got to think about. Do we have adequate access? If it was hard to get in, it's going to be even harder to get out if the fire's hitting us. So we need to consider adequate roads. Are they clear? Do we have bridges that are properly engineered? I drove on a bridge once in a water tender and the bridge moved. And after I got over the bridge and I was safe, I had to check my pants, make sure I hadn't peeped in my pants, because it was scary feeling a bridge moving underneath me. So you got to use those roads as a fire line when you can. Think about where you're going to stage. Every place you go, are we in a safe place when we park? So water sources, we got to think about that. If you have an eductor or an ejector, you can get water from pools and ponds. If you don't, you're dependent on hydrants. So however, when we're doing wildland urban interface firefighting, we're not going to tie into fixed sources. We're going to try and just refill when we can here and there. Remember, people are evacuating around you. Be careful. Watch for those high voltage lines. Watch for above ground fuel storage tanks, propane tanks, and even gasoline fuel tanks and hazardous materials. I was protecting a house once, and there was a shed out in the back, and I was putting water on that, and all these beautiful colors were coming out of the fire. Yeah, it was full of pesticides and herbicides and all sorts of hazardous materials. So I tried to stay away from the windward side. I tried to stay out of the wind and just kept lobbing water in there, didn't get too close. You don't want to breathe that stuff. It can kill you later in life. You might get cancer from it 10 years later. So just be careful. Remember, we're going to work together with those around us. So consider what kind of resources we have. and how long will it take them to arrive. When you call for 5 strike teams, they're not just down the street. They're coming from other parts of the county or other parts of the state. So remember to think about the resources. When we have a wildland urban interface, we have to change our tactics, as I said. So we're going to go defensive, right? If the main fire can't be controlled, if it's a wind-driven event, if it's a fire after long periods of drought, if we're in really rough terrain, these kind of fires require a defensive action. So we're going to concentrate on saving as many structures as we can. Offensive action is our typical little grass fire out there. Main fire can be controlled before the structures are threatened. We're probably not going to be able to do this in our big wildland urban interface fires. So probably what most wildland urban interface fires are going to require is a combination action plan. We're going to have some crews, especially hand crews and a few engine crews, that are working back at the point of origin and working their way along the flanks so our fire doesn't get wider. But we can't stop the head. The head's going to go where the head's going to go. So that's where we're going to go defensive. And we're going to send units ahead of the fire to protect structures and do what we can. Trust in the dozers and the Air Force to do their work to slow the fire, and engine companies. And this, you know, as an engine puke, as we like to call ourselves sometimes, or others call us, as an engine jockey, this is our heyday. This is where we get to do what we do best. So we need to consider what kind of resources. Make sure you call for help when you need help. If you get assigned, look at that bottom slide. If you get told, hey, go down this road and protect the structures down there, or maybe you're even a strike team and you're told to go down there, and then you see 25, 30 postal box at the beginning of that road, 5 engines can't protect that. So you need to ask for more resources. As the fire moves on, you know, that first day, like I said, it's pretty crazy. And the incident command is going to go from a captain very quickly to a battalion chief, from a battalion chief probably to an assistant chief, and some of them it's going to go all the way up to the chief of the department or an incident management team that comes in from the federal government. So our action plan in the beginning is going to be actively to protect those structures, and we're going to do what we can given the situation. As a rule of thumb, in light fuel, you may have to stay with a structure for 20 to 4 minutes and brush 30 to 60 minutes. We protect the structure, we do what we can, and we move on. Water is going to be a big issue, so the water requirements are going to depend on what kind of fuel, and if the building does start to catch on fire, if we get some fire in the roof or whatever, we might use 400 to 800 gallons per engine per hour. So we are going to have to refill when we can, but don't connect to a hydrant and stay connected to a hydrant with a whole bunch of hose out like you would for a big structure. Our initial actions are going to be to predict where the fire will be in 1 hour blocks, and we're going to work with a plan. So, you know, we got to consider time of day, consider the fuels, consider the topography, consider the weather, consider the fire behavior, consider the threat to structures, and how long until assistant arrives. Okay, we're going to take a break on this one, and then be sure to catch part 2. We're going to start off right around here and finish the rest of this in a second portion. So take a break, go get something to drink, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do, and come back and watch the second video.